Rangers fans, welcome to season 3 of Liberty Blue. I'm Andrew Chelney. That is Nick Zararis. This is the Essential New York Rangers podcast powered by Believe Network. Nick, it is that time of the offseason where we go through each division in our preview series. Last 2 weeks, we did the West, we did the Central, we did the Pacific, and now we are moving on to the Atlantic.
This division got 5 teams into the playoffs last year. Montreal and Ottawa both returning to the postseason for the first time in a while. Montreal, first time since they made the final in the very funky season with the All-Canada division. Ottawa for the first time since they made the conference final in 2017 when they beat the Rangers in the second round of the playoffs. Toronto, Tampa Bay, Florida, perennial playoff teams for much of the last handful of seasons. The Sabres and Red Wings, who desperately would like to mimic the success that Ottawa and Montreal had last year. And then the Bruins, who are going to wear it on the chin this year. There's no other way to put it. We'll start with the Bruins. Don Sweeney, I don't understand still how he has this job. I'm going to be straight up with you. After having the job as long as he has had it, it is natural that you need to go in a different direction. And I cannot believe he was able to convince the Jacobs family that it was Jim Montgomery who was the problem with the organization, that, hey, we need to go in a different direction. Well, Don, you've picked the team. You haven't drafted a useful player since Jeremy Swayman. The young guys have been left to die in Providence forever. And now, okay, well, we'll trade Marchand. Okay. You have McAvoy, you have Pasta, you have Jeremy Swayman. You are going to be paying Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov for quite a while into the future because you tried to reinforce your team through free agency. This roster is a bunch of third liners and Pasta. I think Lindholm is probably more of a second liner than a third liner, but this roster is extremely unimpressive. They will be entirely reliant on their 3 stars to maybe carry some outsized share of the load, but they're over under this year 77.5, which would be 20 points clear of the last playoff spot and firmly in the lottery. So I think everybody's kind of on the same page here that this team is going to stink. It's just a matter of how badly they stink.
I'll put it to you this way. I have Daily Faceoff open right now. Their first line left winger is Morgan Geekie. And you're going to sit here and tell me with, like, even if you are the most optimistic I almost said Celtics Bruins fan there is, Morgan Geekie is a first line left winger to you? Is that what you're telling me? No, this team is bad. This team is not. They had 76 points, I think, last year it was, and they're probably going to be somewhere around that this year. This team is just going to be bad. Like, there's really no way for me to sugarcoat that. This team it's literally Pasternak and company and friends at this point. Like, there's
you put McAvoy in there, Swayman in there.
Yeah, well, I'm talking, just forwards here for a second. Like, it's you take a look at this.
Fine, he's not bad.
I'm not, some of these guys aren't bad. I'm not saying these guys are bad. Like, Pasternak is obviously fantastic. Some of these guys are going to do positive things. I'm not saying
someone's got to score goals.
Yeah, the Bruins are going to win more than 3 games. I'm not saying that they're, that they're going to go 3-79 here, but you take a look at their depth sheet, the roster sheet, the moves that they've made. And it's like, this is the team that you're putting out onto the ice in the year of our Lord 2025, 2026. Like, it's this team is going to finish dead last in the division again. I think they're going to be one of the worst teams in the East. I don't think they're going to be quite as bad as some of the teams in the West that we talked about, but they're going to be down there. There's going to be a fight for that. They might finish top 5 in the draft lottery. Like, this is the team that's going nowhere fast. I mean, the thing about this too is, where do you go if you're Boston? Because you still have Pasternak, right? You still have McAvoy, you still have Swayman, even though last year he don't have a great year by any stretch of the imagination.
He didn't have a training camp. He came in cold. Yeah. I'm inclined to give Swayman a mulligan on last year.
Even if Swayman bounces back and has a much better season, this team still is not going to win a whole lot of games, which begs the question of, okay, well, if you're going to sell at the deadline, who are you going to sell? Who on this roster is expendable that other teams would also want to trade for? That's another question that you have to ask if you're Boston, because now you are going to be bad. You don't have players to sell high on to acquire more assets, and you're kind of stuck.
they let their life cycle burn too long, and this happens. I think the comparison here is what happened to the Sharks. The Sharks went to the conference final in 2019. They thought they were still in the mix, and then the floor fell out like that. And the Bruins 2 years ago are one Brad Marchand concussion away from maybe beating Florida in the second round and going through to the conference final and playing the Rangers. And you think about how different the last year and change would have been if the Bruins make the conference final, Florida doesn't. Marchand stays healthy. The Panthers have questions about how viable their core is. The Bruins, if they make it to a conference final, are maybe a little less inclined to let guys leave, to maybe try and reorient their roster. But this roster is extremely average. I forget who made the joke the week after free agency, but they said something to the effect of Don Sweeney solved the problem of the Bruins not having a second line by having 3 third lines. And that's effectively what they've done. When you go through that bottom 9 past that first line, it's 3 third lines. Now, they will score goals. Pavel Zacha will score some goals. Sure. Tanner Jeannot will score some goals, but they are an unimpressive team that
one for every pick that the Lightning traded to get him.
He'll get 4 or 5. I do not understand how Don Sweeney is selling the vision of, I'm going to stick the landing here. They're not in a position like the Stars were, where they took a step back after that initial push with Klingberg, Benn, and Sagan, and they had the one draft that was great. They landed Robertson, Hintz, and Ottinger all in one draft, and that dramatically altered their trajectory. The Bruins have been picking 3 or 4 times in drafts where teams have 7 picks, and largely picks that are in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th rounds. It's hard to turn this over. The key to sustaining success for an extended period of time is turning your roster over, getting cheaper, getting younger. And you think about the brain drain, Bergeron and Krejci retire. Jake DeBrusk leaves in free agency. Those are 3 key players from the team 3 years ago. You had to trade Ullmark to save money, and you lost your goalie tandem, and you have to play Korpisalo now, who's a below average backup. It really creates a trickle-down effect of, they missed their boat like 2 or 3 separate times. And before we move on, I do think it's worth pointing out, the Bruins had probably 4 chances in the last 10 years to win the Stanley Cup, and they only came away with 1, the one they won against Vancouver in 2011. They had the 2-goal lead in 2013 against the Blackhawks, and they lose that game. 2019, they were heavy favorites against a Blues team that nobody was impressed by, and they lost that series. They had a Game 7 on home ice. They lose 4-1. Play a really stinky one. They lose 3 overtime games in the first round, the year they set the record for points in a season when they win the President's Trophy a couple of years ago. And they got nothing to show for it now. Sure, you'll get your Bergeron jersey retirement. You'll get your Krejci, your Chara, your Tuukka Rask, but very reminiscent. At least they got their cup, unlike the Rangers. That Bruins team. And, key contributors like Tim Thomas and Mark Savard predate a lot of the core of the guys we're talking about right now, but they did get one at least. And now It's a matter of, where do you go from here? And if you're Don Sweeney, can you really draft well enough to recoup this team that 2 years from now you can get back in the mix? Because I think that's your play if you're the Bruins. It's, we take it on the chin this year. We try and get Gavin McKenna, and we recoup cap space over the next year and a half. And then a year or 2 from now, we push chips in around Pasta Swayman and McAvoy and say we're going for it again. But that's a really hard sell. Great players don't get to free agency, and it's going to be a hard sell. Like, we were talking about this earlier this summer, as far as the Blackhawks, and why would Mitch Marner choose to go to the Blackhawks and be one of 2 guys on a team? It's the same problem here.
Right.
Even if you get to free agency next summer, why would Kaprizov want to go there? Why would McDavid? Why would Eichel? Maybe because the Boston thing, but even that's, kind of tenuous. There's not a lot to allure you here. And, you have the ghosts of free agency past still hanging around, like Lindholm, like Zadorov, who we all knew those contracts were going to age poorly. And within 2 years, they're poorly aging.
The only place the Boston Celtics are, I keep saying the Boston. I work in basketball, guys. I'm sorry, but yeah, the only place the Boston Bruins are going is the bottom of the division. You really cannot convince me that they're gonna be anywhere close to a playoff spot, barring a miracle.
No, it would take something drastic.
Yeah.
One of the guys in the bottom half of this lineup playing remarkably well, but their over under preseason is 77.5. That feels like a pretty safe under as far as where they're going to be. They're probably going to be in the low 70s or high 60s. That's a ping pong balls team right there.
Yeah.
Speaking of ping pong balls team, that pivots us naturally to the Buffalo Sabres, who have the longest playoff drought in North American sports at the moment. They have a pretty nice team on paper, but they are coached by Lindy Ruff, which is a massive ding. Beyond Byram, Power, and Dahlin, their defense is pretty mediocre. Pekka Luukkonen was pretty bad last year after being pretty good 2 years ago. Devin Levy, maybe not going to happen for him. Looks like he's going to start the year in the AHL. Tage Thompson's really good. They've got a lot of nice individual pieces. They did Peterka for Josh Doan, which was a little bit weird, but I guess they were tired of Peterka not really trying. And look, real quick as an aside, as a veteran of the Alexi Lafreniere's playing too much softball and drinking too much wars, what would you like a 24-year-old, 22-year-old with, a 5-figure direct deposit every 2 weeks to do? No shit, they're going to go out and have fun. Is it his fault the Sabres suck? No. He's one guy on a team of 20. If everybody's playing well and he's the only guy dragging ass who looks like he's got cement for feet, okay, we can have a conversation. He had 20 goals last year, 25 goals, one of the better players on the team. And he's going out too much. He's partying too much.
And it's really interesting, too, that these stories only come out on bad teams.
Yeah.
Like, also,
and it only comes out after they get rid of them, too.
Right. Exactly.
Like, people who know these stories sit on them. And then after they get traded, people around the Sabres weren't happy with the fact he would go out all the time. Well, how come you didn't report that when he was on the team? It speaks to what we talk about all the time, the idea that people sit on information all the time until it's convenient. Peterka's a good hockey player. There was 5 minutes there where we thought the Rangers were going to be in on Peterka, and everybody seemed pretty optimistic about that. But now, he goes out and parties too much. Okay. And what do you do on the weekend?
Right.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, do you think they're monks? Do you think they're just going to hang out like in Buffalo? He's just going to sit in his apartment and play Fortnite all the time. Not everybody's Patrick Laine.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Like, he's he's in his early 20s and he's in Buffalo. Like, what did you want him to do exactly? Like, and that's the thing too is you don't hear these types of stories from successful teams.
I'm cool if they're on a good team,
right? Exactly. Yeah. And like you'll see the same story but spun positively. Like, this player is going out with this vet a lot, and like they're hitting the clubs, and like this is propelling this. Like I'm over exaggerating a little bit, but you get
everybody
my point
tells the stories about Yager as a rookie, like it was the best thing in the world that he would go to the casino and come to the game. Like the narratives are really team dependent.
Listen, I'm not here to say that it couldn't have been a problem. I'm sure, maybe there's a situation in which maybe he went, maybe one too many times, or, maybe he overdid it a little bit. I'm sure the Sabres, like if that happened, I'm sure the Sabres, wouldn't have been super happy about it. But I also don't think that my man's was, sleeping on the bar table every day after games. Like there's just no way that that's true either. Right. So you're in Buffalo. You could go see the Niagara Falls, but like how many times are you going to go see the Niagara Falls? Right. Like, besides that, what do you do for fun? You go out, you go to bars, you have fun. I didn't see a problem there. I mean, I kind of just
problems
have
with
Buffalo.
Jack Hughes going out in Hoboken. No,
yeah, I mean, come on.
He's a lot more likely to get noticed in Hoboken than JJ Peterka is in Buffalo. Like, let's be adults here.
I disagree with that because Buffalo fans are insane. Like that market's one of the most diehard fans out there, despite that team being real stinky the past 20 years.
You raise a fair point. But this team, man, there's talent here. This team should be able to stay in the mix. But we've said this for much of the last handful of seasons. Their top 6 is pretty good. Their bottom 6 is pretty good. They have 3 decent NHL defensemen. Kesselring is an upside potential. They have a goalie who has a track record of decent NHL success. I just don't think Lindy Ruff's a good coach. That's really all it comes down to for me. I think the simple matter of the fact is they do not have a coach who's going to coax the best performance out of these guys. And all it takes is one skid and it's over. We have seen Buffalo do this a lot. They get off to great starts relatively consistently. They're in a playoff spot through mid-November, late November, and then as the season wears along, the cracks start to show, they fall apart. This is not a bad, untalented hockey team, but until I see them in a playoff game, I'm going to be very skeptical of their capacity, especially considering the division they're in, where the teams that are in front of them, like, they didn't even clear Detroit last year, and Detroit, I would argue, is a less talented hockey team than Buffalo, but they couldn't get past them. I think Ottawa is clearly better. I think Montreal is definitely better. Mm-hmm. And then the three perennial playoff teams, Tampa Bay, Toronto, and Florida, are all better. It's going to be a really tough path for them, even though I think they have talent.
I have them in sixth. I do think they're not going to be the worst team in the Atlantic, but even if you're an optimistic Sabres fan, again, like, you're telling me they're going to be better than Florida? No. Tampa Bay? No. Ottawa? No. Montreal? No. Toronto? No. Where's your playoff spot then? That's what you have to that's what you have to ask yourself. And again, at this point, I hope I'm wrong. Like, if for the city of Buffalo, I hope I'm wrong and the Sabres make the playoffs. I mean, the Sabres fans are they're such a passionate fan base, and they deserve a team that actually performs well on the ice for once, and they deserve to make the playoffs for sure. I just don't see a path to them being better than the teams I just mentioned in the Atlantic alone. Forget about the Metro for a second. Which of those five teams that I mentioned can Buffalo usurp and make the playoffs? You want to argue Montreal? I don't see it. You want to argue Ottawa? I don't see it either. Okay, well, the other three are going to make the playoffs. So where are you going to go? And that's, I just, like I said, I just wish that Buffalo, for the sake of their fans, does better. Hope I'm wrong, but I just don't see it. I think they're going to finish sixth.
Yeah. The other thing is their over-under total for this upcoming season is 84.5. And that's still like 10 points off of what would be a playoff spot. A playoff spot's going to be probably 95, 96 points. And like 85 is real progress for the Sabres, who have largely been a lottery team for much of the last decade. But at a certain point, it's hard. I mean, they've had real issues. They have had a lot of people cancel season tickets. They have attendance issues. The Pagulas not so subtly think they want to get a new hockey arena too, on top of the new football stadium they're getting. It's really hard to get a new hockey arena when your team stinks and nobody shows up. So if the Sabres are going to make progress towards any of their goals, it needs to start with the on-ice results to buy some credibility back. It is hard to tell people when you have seats falling apart, when you have seats with mold on them, when you have water leaking out of the ceiling, that, hey, yeah, we need a new stadium. Well, you draw 6,500 people most of the time, and a lot of people are only there to see the other team. It is a really untenable situation. And, you get to a certain point where they're not quite the Coyotes as far as unseriousness with ownership, but we know the Pagulas care more about the Bills than the Sabres. That's not a secret. We see it in their priorities and where they spend money, what they choose to prioritize. And it's hard for me to believe that a team led by Lindy Ruff, who was hired only because of nostalgia, not because of his work recently, whether with the Devils or as a Rangers assistant, it is really hard for me to see a world where this works out for them. All of the last 15 years are evidence that things don't work out for the Sabres.
No, that this is, the Sabres just need a full-on facelift. They really just need a whole transformation. They need probably a new owner. They need a new manager. They need a new coach. They need a new direction in general, because they've been trying the same thing for 20 years, man. Like, at a certain point, you got to try something else. You've been trying the same experiment 20 times. The 21st time is going to give you the same result that you had the other 20 times. You got to do something different. And I don't see it in Buffalo. I just don't.
Yeah, they're in a really awkward position. Speaking of awkward positions, we get to Detroit now, who comes in, again, underperforming their expectations. Their over-under is only 83.5 for this upcoming season. And every few weeks, I see a clip from one of the large talking head podcasts about, is Steve Yzerman good? No, he's not.
No.
We have 5 years of evidence that he's not good at this. And look, some of this is, unfortunate. You didn't pick 1, 2, or 3 overall more than once. You got 2 nice pieces in Raymond and Sider. You pushed in a lot of chips on guys like the Brinket, on guys like Patrick Kane. You sent ungodly amounts of money on mediocre free agents like Andrew Kopp, Ben Sherratt. You've been on the goalie carousel nonstop for much of the last 4 years. And the point I wanted to make about Steve Yzerman is the one we've made about Mark Messier more than once when it comes to the Rangers. Don't hire the team legend, because then you have to awkwardly fire the team legend if it doesn't go well. And I don't think Steve Yzerman's player credibility is why he's gotten an extra year of this, but it's not out of the question that, the Ilitch family is more willing to give him a little bit of extra time than he probably deserves, because this team doesn't have a lot to show for the money they've spent. They have, Andrew Kopp's like a $5 million fourth line center.
Right.
They have terribly allocated money. They have put poor Seider in an awful position where he's been carrying terrible defensive partners in hard matchup minutes. They can't play defense. They have no goaltending. They score a ton of goals. They have a good power play, but their defense has been a real issue for a number of years. And they don't really have a lot of improvement here. They are in an awkward position, very similar to Buffalo, where they're stuck effectively. They have a few nice guys, and that'll keep them in the mix. But like Buffalo, like Ottawa, they've been in the mix for the last few years where they hang around through about January. And if they get hot at the right time, they stay around. But more often than not, over the last 5 years, they've fallen apart. Again, this is not a bad team, but it's not a good one. It's definitely not a good one.
No, I have them 7th in the Atlantic. I don't see a way for them to generate enough defensive sustainability for them to, again, beat Florida, Tampa Bay, Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto. They just don't have it. Like, you tell me Ben Sherratt is gonna win the Norris and then they're gonna make playoffs? Like, no. The answer is no. I like Mo Seider a lot. I like Lucas Raymond a lot. I like Dylan Larkin a lot. Like, they have a lot, they have some names in there that truly just deserve better. But this team just doesn't have anything that I would quantify as elite, like elite top of the top. Like, our best guys can beat your best guys. The only like way that I see that happening is with their New Jersey. Their New Jersey is fire. The Centennial jersey that they came out with today was incredible, and I want one, and I have to like sell a liver or something to make it happen. But you know what? I might do it because it's really nice. But like, they're going to look really nice winning 35 games, maybe. Like, this is not a team that, I have a whole lot of hopes for. And yeah, I just don't see what the Yzer plan is. He's had multiple opportunities, multiple years now. The runway, like you said, is probably longer than it should be at this point. And yet this is the team after 6 years of him at the helm. At a certain point, like, Daily Faceoff as JVR as the top left wing in 2025. Come on. That this is not tenable.
They don't develop guys well. That's kind of like the underlying problem here. And like, some of that ties to like the regime prior to Yzerman there. But Larkin, yeah. Lucas Raymond, sure. But a lot of guys who never really lived up to their potential. They drafted in the top 10, not the top 5. But you got to turn some of those guys into NHLers. And it's been a revolving door in net and on the back end. And look, they traded for John Gibson. This is probably the best goalie they've had in a while. But again, John Gibson is not the caliber of goalie who's going to be able to overcome environmental circumstances. Frankly, even the elite goalies would struggle in this environment. And I think putting all your eggs in the basket of Gibson, who, played all of 20-something games last year because he couldn't stay healthy, I think it's a really dangerous proposition for their long-term prospects. And this is what happens when a general manager acts in their own self-interest and not in the interest of the team. When you are a GM who feels their feet to the fire, you are going to spend in free agency. You are going to over leverage yourself in trades, and you're going to put yourself in an awkward position where the next guy is going to have a really hard time cleaning up the mess. And that's the case here. Whoever the next GM is of this group, they're going to have to take a year or two to reorient this team around the Raymond Seider group. Because like, DeBrincat's good. Don't get me wrong. DeBrincat is a good hockey player. Yeah. But he's not the caliber of guy you can build the team around. And I think that's part of the issue here. I think the acquiescence they've given to Patrick Kane, who like at this point in his career is a specialist. Like, he puts up decent counting stats, but he's not driving play on his own. He doesn't have the same dynamic abilities. He's a third or second liner. they've used him higher in the lineup. They've kept him with the brinket. He's been on the power play, and they've put up good stats. But they're not winning hockey games.
Right.
They don't have a defense they do not play good enough team defense to win games. And it's not a coincidence that a lot of the forwards they've targeted in free agency are just raw offense guys, and they've said, we'll outscore our problems. And you can score 5 goals a game, but if you give up 6, you still lose. That's kind of been the story of the Red Wings the last 2 years.
And it's going to be this way this year again. Like the blue line, you have Cedar, sure, you have Edvinsson, who I like as well. Eric Gustafsson, former Rangers legend Eric Gustafsson, like he can be a decent option for you at times. But I just, I don't see how this team plays solid enough team defense as a whole to warrant the idea that they're going to either be in a playoff spot or close to a playoff spot comparatively to some of the teams that that are above them in the standings. Like, it's just, there's not enough here for me to be able to convince myself that there is a likely path to them being in a playoff spot come the playoffs. There just isn't. It's not there for me to spin zone myself into believing that. It's not there.
Oh, definitely not. They are as mid as it gets, to put it politely. They are not bad, but they're definitely not good. That brings us to somebody who everybody seems to be very optimistic about, the Montreal Canadiens, who massively overachieved their over-under total from last year. Their over-under this year is 92.5, which would put them probably outside of the playoffs. But I think if you believe in the young guys, in particular Demidov, they traded for Zachary Bolduc, they traded for Noah Dobson, Montembeault and Dobesh is a pretty good goalie tandem. You think Slavkovsky keeps taking steps. This is a pretty solid group that is going to have a lot of potential, that I think if at least one or two of the youngish guys take steps, they could push for second, third in this division as opposed to a wild card. But it's largely going to be dependent on if the young guys, particularly guys who weren't on the team last year, and I think Demidov in particular, if Demidov has a pretty good first full season, I think this team has the capacity to push for second in the Atlantic. I think they are going to have some growing pains on their back end. As much as I like Lane Hudson, as much as I like Noah Dobson, they are not the most proficient defensively. I think that will lead to some issues, but this team should score enough so that they can mitigate their defensive problems. And I think there's enough here to feel pretty good about the direction. I think they go over this number. I think they make the playoffs. I would be very surprised if this team did not make the playoffs, in all honesty.
I have them 4th in the division, and I have them making the playoffs. I think this is a team that is going to build off of their success. So they're going to have guys like Slavkovsky, Suzuki, who was incredible for them last year, and Cole Caulfield was incredible for them last year. I think this is a roster that is only going to get better. And I don't know anything about Ivan Demidov. I couldn't pick him off the street, but I have a feeling that come like January, a whole lot of people are going to know who he is. He's somebody that can really light up the score sheet, and I do think that he adds another layer of potential to this team that Montreal just hasn't seen in a while. And this is a team that's dangerous. They are a very dangerous team. I like their depth. I like their blue line for the most part. Even Montembeault, who can be a little bit up and down sometimes. I do think he's a solid goaltender that can lead this team to, and play 55 games for them alongside of Jacob Dobesh. And this is you wouldn't want to face this team in the first round. I'll tell you that right now, because again, this is a team that's playing with fire. They are young guys that just got a little taste of the playoffs last season against Washington, and they're going to be out for blood, this upcoming season. I wouldn't want to face them. I really wouldn't. And I think they're going to make the playoffs, so they're going to scare some teams.
They have enough. And look, they're very much in the upward stage of their build. They definitely have a trade to make because they have so many assets they've accumulated over the last few years. I know everybody who does content keeps photoshopping Sidney Crosby into a Canadiens jersey, but something along the lines of upgrading that second line center spot would go a long way. And it doesn't need to be someone as good as Sidney Crosby. Maybe you take a swing on somebody who's in that RFA tier of guys who, with a little more opportunity, could match, the window you're building here, because the Canadiens are pretty set up now. Most of their guys are on the younger side, 24, 25, have a little bit of NHL experience in the cases of guys like Caulfield and Slavkovsky, and Suzuki, but you have the capacity here to really set yourself up for 2, 3, 4 good kicks at it before your core is in their late 20s. And then based on that, you can adjust what you want to build this team around if you think you're particularly deficient in anything. This is a slow play. Make no mistake about it. Montreal has taken their time to get here, but now they're going to have a significant period of time to go for it, which is ultimately your goal. If you embark on the full scale, tear it down, rebuild the way Montreal did, you want to get 5, 6, you want to have at least 3 or 4 good tries. You want to make the playoffs 6 or 7 times. And then you hope one of those 3 or 4 times, everything lines up and you win the whole thing. That's all it takes, man. You get one good run out of a group, and then it doesn't matter anymore. We're still waiting for another Avalanche Cup. We're still waiting for another Vegas Cup. We're still waiting for a second Bruins Cup. The Bruins one I don't think is coming, but teams win one, and suddenly the intensity. Washington hadn't won a playoff series prior to last year since winning the Stanley Cup. It buys you a lot of time, and the benefit of Montreal having such a young group means they're going to have a while to try and get this core right around these guys. They have a coach who we all seem to like, Marty St. Louis, who has done a really nice job of building those young guys up, in particular worrying about their confidence, putting them in positions to succeed. This team is set up very nicely. Granted, I could see a world where they have a very much like a Devils year, like the Devils had 2 years ago after they won the playoff series against the Rangers. They came back the next year. They had the injury bug. They underperformed. They had the year from hell. It's perfectly within reason that happens to Montreal. But if everything breaks right for them, this is a playoff team. No doubt in my mind.
Yeah. And predicting injuries is not something that I like doing. It's like, injuries could happen to anybody on any team in any sport. And, we're talking about, if you turn injuries off like you could in franchise mode, right? Not be a GM mode. I know that was an issue for me last week. So, I'll call it franchise mode because I'm old and, I'm not old and washed anymore. But yeah, if all goes well for Montreal, they should make the playoffs. This is a scary team that I would not like to face in the first round.
No, and they don't necessarily have the young and dumb excuse anymore. We're like, oh, we don't know how good we are. It's kind of crazy how far you can get in the playoffs. I think of that Carolina team that went to the conference final the first year Brindamore was the coach. That's the textbook example of that. The Rangers in 2022 were an example of that. A team that maybe didn't realize, oh, we can do this, and didn't realize maybe how hard it was. But now you have some perspective. Montreal gave Washington a decent fight. I definitely think they're a playoff team.
Yep.
That brings us to Ottawa, who went over their number last year. They're at 95.5 this year, which again would be right on the bubble, last spot in. I think a lot of this team's outcomes depend on how their young guys, in particular, I think Jake Sanderson, continue to build. I think if Jake Sanderson has a good first half of the year, he could play his way onto the Olympic team for Team USA next year. I thought he did a great job as a fill-in in the Four Nations. I think his style, is particular, his skating fared well in that environment where it was really fast, it was really high skill. So I think Ottawa is really nicely positioned. And look, they definitely have work to do. This roster definitely is a bit weaker, I would say, than Montreal. But I think they're high-end guys, Stützle, Tkachuk, Sanderson, all varying degrees of really good. Claude Giroux keeps staving off the aging curve, still an impactful player. If Ullmark can stay healthy, I think that would do worlds for them. He, of course, dealt with injuries last year, missed quite a bit of time. So they're in a decent spot. I think they definitely need one more forward, but this is a pretty solid team.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree. I think I have them third in the Atlantic. I think they will add at the deadline. I do think they add maybe 2 players to kind of add to that mix. Also, getting Jordan Spence from LA I don't want to say for free,
pretty much nothing,
but pretty much for free is insane. And he's going to really fit onto that blue line really well, I think. And I can't believe LA just kind of gave him up like that. That's kind of crazy. But I don't really know what LA is doing. But we talked about that, when we talked about the Pacific. And yeah, I think this blue line is a lot stronger. I think the Tkachuk, the Stützle, the even like the Cousins guys are really going to take that next step. I really like Jake Sanderson as a defenseman. He's a really, really solid player in his position. And yeah, as long as Ullmark doesn't get hurt, I think this is a team that is I don't want to say cruise to a top 3 spot, but they are going to look like a solid team. Like, yeah, there's going to be, issues here and there for sure. And, I don't have them number 1, but this is a solid playoff team that I also would not want to play in the first round. They are hungry. They're mad that they haven't gotten later into the playoffs yet. And I think this is the year they finally can really compete for that.
And to give them credit, they were pretty good against Toronto in that first round series. They, at 5-on-5, they outplayed Toronto for good stretches of that series. If they could have gotten a little more power play luck, they took way too many penalties. That's definitely an issue Ottawa has to resolve. I appreciate Brady Tkachuk wanting to play with a little bit of juice, but when you're just in a parade to the penalty box over and over again because you're trying to prove a point about how tough you are, how you're not going to take it, you're kind of defeating yourself. And it's unfortunate because when they're at their best, that's a pretty solid forward group that has some upside. And I think they're in a reasonable spot. I think they're probably the last team in. I think it really depends on how the other half of the Metro shakes out, which we'll talk about next week. And I think that'll really inform a lot of how I think ultimately the various spots shake out. That brings us to Florida, who finished 3rd last year. They came in under their over-under total. Their over-under total is this year is 105.5. I think they come in under that. I think this team they came under it by 6 last year. I think they know they just need to make the playoffs. I think they are so veteran laden. I think the fact they won't have Matthew Tkachuk probably until after the Olympics is also a factor to consider as well. This is clearly the best team in the NHL over the last 2 years. I could argue maybe even the last 3. They're coming into the season with the most talented forward group in the league. They have a future Hall of Fame goalie. I think Paul Maurice, by virtue of winning 2 Stanley Cups, is probably a future Hall of Fame head coach. Matthew Tkachuk, when he's healthy, is one of the 15 best players in the world. Barkov, one of the 10 best. Reinhart, one of the 20 best. This is as good as it gets as far as roster construction goes. The only real weakness is their defense, but because they play such good team defense, it doesn't really matter that on an individual level, they're guys, Ekblad, Seth Jones, Mikkola, Jeff Petrie. Like in a vacuum, those guys on their own are not great. But if you put them in the structure that Florida plays with, they do more than a fine enough job.
I have Florida winning the division. And that, I can see the argument of, okay, well, they're not going to try as hard to win every game because all they have to do is make the playoffs and then they're in. But I think because this roster is just so good, I think that, even when they give 90%, 88%, that's still enough because of how deep they are. Like, when you have Brad Marchand on your 3rd line, like let's say Carter Verhaeghe takes a game off from the first line and Brad Marchand just comes in and scores you 2 goals and then you win 4-3 because Marchand's on your 3rd line. That team is so deep that I think that even in those games where they're not, diving on every loose puck and like really giving everything that they have, they still have a really good, really good chance to win those games just because of how deep they are on this roster, that anybody can score at any given moment. And also on top of their good team defense, like you mentioned, this is a team that I just don't see anybody in the Atlantic winning more regular season games. I don't. And there's one team that we haven't talked about yet, which we'll get to in a minute, that I don't have in my top 3 or top 4 that I think will kind of give Florida more leeway to win the division here.
Look, I think Florida is really just if they have the juice, if you can go to 3 straight finals. I mean, I think I've spent most of this summer trying to find reasons to pick anyone else. And like anytime I've talked about another team, I've been like, but yeah, Florida's still better. And it's hard when they have won 2 straight cups. They have done it in pretty dominating fashion, especially in the earlier rounds of the playoffs. I mean, they obliterated Tampa Bay in the first round last year. Tampa Bay didn't have a chance in that series. They steamrolled against Carolina in the conference final. This team has had a real drive that we just haven't really seen. And look, we're not that far removed from Tampa Bay going 2 in a row, Pittsburgh going 2 in a row. This happens relatively frequently in the hockey world, but Florida has beaten the crap out of teams along the way. You could make an argument they broke the Rangers the way that conference final went and the subsequent fallout of that. This is a really scary hockey team that, as long as they keep this group of guys together, is going to be a really difficult path to beat. I have a hard time seeing anyone beating them 4 out of 7 times. they have the luxury of playing guys like Marchand, like Lindell as third liners on other teams. On a bad team, that's a first line. On the Bruins, that's their first line. You would have Lindell playing with Pasta, and that would be good enough for them. But this is a really scary hockey team that I don't think they will push the envelope in the regular season. I'm not saying they're coasting, but I think more likely than not, they probably finish low 100s, maybe even 98, 99 like they did last year. And that brings us to Tampa Bay, who finished second in last year's division. They went under their number last year by 2. Their over-under total this year is 102.5. It's really simple. Can the old head stay healthy? This is a really good team. I think they are better suited for the regular season than the postseason. Their lack of depth is a real problem. Their bottom 6 is not great, but they have one of the best forward groups in the league. Kucherov, Point, Cirelli, Hagel, Gensel. That's as good a 1 through 5 as you're going to find.
Sure.
Hedman and McDonough still kicking as top 20-ish defensemen in the world. Vasilevsky's a top 10 goalie in the world. Most nights, they're going to have more talent than the guys they play against, and that's how they win games. It's not the flashiest. It's not the most exciting, but this is a really good team. This is a team with a ton of experience. They just need to not play the Panthers in the first round. That's really all I could say. If Tampa Bay avoided Florida, I definitely think they could have beaten Toronto last year. I think they could have beaten Ottawa. I think they could have beat Montreal, Washington. I think Tampa Bay could have beat a majority of the teams in the playoffs last year other than Florida, and that's just because Florida was kind of inevitable.
I have them second in the division. I think they're really built for the regular season. That top 1 through 5. Their goalie and the blue line still being solid on most nights. That's going to be enough for them. Their depth is nothing special, but they don't really they are really built for games 1 through 82, soon to be 1 through 84 for reasons. But this is a team that's going to win a bunch of games. I think they have enough on a day-to-day basis to overcome some of the challenges that their current roster construction is facing because of how good their high-end talent is. My question is, okay, well, you get to the playoffs, now what? Are you better than Florida? Can you overcome, Ottawa hungry? Can you overcome Montreal hungry? Can you overcome some of these other teams, right? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. Maybe the answer is yes. I'm not saying they can't win a playoff series or maybe even 2. Obviously, we'll see what happens come the trade deadline. I'm sure they'll be in a playoff spot. I'm sure they'll be buying again. So we'll see where they are then. But as of right now, I think they're going to finish second with how this roster is shaking up. I do think they, like you said, I agree with you for sure that they are more suited to the regular season than the playoffs. But make no mistake, they have the capacity to do some damage in the playoffs as well.
Yeah, they just need the right matchup. I mean, we talk about this a lot. You can make the same point for Colorado, for Dallas, who they've had hard first, second round matchups and haven't been able to get to a conference final, or in the case of Dallas, a Stanley Cup final. Tampa Bay has as much juice as anyone. I mean, they turned Brandon Hagel into a point-per-game player who's going to be on Team Canada at the Olympics. Cirelli will be on Team Canada at the Olympics. Braden Point will be on Team Canada at the Olympics. John Cooper will coach Team Canada at the Olympics. This infrastructure is really good. They integrated Jake Gensel really well into the team last year. He put up really good stats his first year there. I think this team really just needs a favorable playoff matchup in the first round. I think Tampa Bay has a real incentive to try and push for first in the division to avoid a first round series with Florida. And I think, frankly, they're better than Toronto on paper. I think Florida and Tampa Bay are relatively comparable, though I think Florida is better. Tampa Bay, I think, is the second most talented team in this division. I would be surprised if they weren't one of the 3 division spots. I'd be very surprised if they fell to a wild card spot. But I think agree. Tampa Bay is very well positioned to basically repeat what they did last year, but hope they can get a little bit better on the margins. Maybe full season of Yanni Gourde makes a difference in the bottom 6, something to keep an eye on as well. And that brings us to the Toronto Maple Leafs, who went over their total last year, whose over-under total is only 99.5 this year. So if you think the Leafs are a playoff team, that's something worth keeping an eye on. They didn't really replace Mitch Marner's production. No. They didn't even try to find 2 or 3 40-point guys. I don't mind Dakota Joshua. He's fine, but him, Matthias McKelly, maybe you get 60 points combined out of those two guys. We know Toronto's issue has been their lack of depth in the playoffs, where when the big guys don't score, their bottom six has been effectively useless. The Scott Lawton trade deadline edition was a disaster. Their defense is another year older, a lot more miles on the treads, a goalie tandem that is very much being held together with glue and duct tape. Like, in a vacuum, Woll and Stolars are both pretty good. Neither guy has an extensive track record of being an NHL starter, making 40, 50, 60 starts. I think that's a massive red flag. I think the fact that you didn't even try to replace Mitch Marner's counting stat production is going to be an issue. And look, they have a lot of money tied up in okay guys like Max Domi, like Bobby McMahon, like Dakota Joshua, like Scott Lawton. And in theory, maybe it's a bit more evenly distributed, the production, but this team's less talented than Tampa Bay, less talented than Florida. I would dare say they might even be less talented than Ottawa or Montreal if things don't break right for them, especially the goalie situation, which we've seen this happen to Toronto, where they do the goalie, like Jack Campbell. Like, he had the one good year. They made him the full-time starter. He got hurt. He never really got healthy because they kept rushing him back, and they fell apart in the first round. I think Toronto is a very tenuous situation. I think they're a playoff team, but I think this is the weakest iteration of the Leafs we've seen in quite a while.
My boldest take is they missed the playoffs. And so I would firmly take the under on their points. I have them fifth in the division. And, I'm going to make Toronto so mad at me, and they're going to be pitchforking at my door. I can already hear them knocking. I hear them, riding outside my window. Like, this is, I've already angered them, off the rip here. But you trade a quarter for 2 dimes and a nickel, hoping to get the same kind of value, and on paper you do, but it takes up more space in your pocket, doesn't it? It takes up more, it takes up more space to get the same value. Maybe you get the same value. And I just don't see how removing a guy like Mitch Marner and not replacing him with anyone remotely of the same caliber. Obviously, there's very few Mitch Marners in the NHL, but you have to try to replace his production somewhat. At least get maybe a 60-point scorer, maybe a 65-point scorer up on that top line to see if maybe Matthews and whomstever could try to replicate most of that production. Obviously, Mitch Marner is an elite player, and so you can't reproduce all of it, but somebody that can get to that ceiling a little bit closer. And I just don't see where Toronto is with that level of replacement. I like Machelli. I think he's a good player. I think Joshua is a fine player, but they're not those two combined are not Mitch Marner.
No, Marner's a 100-point player who plays fringe Selke caliber defense, who's a power play guy, kills penalties. They will be lucky if Joshua, like Bobby McMahon, Domi, and McKelly combined produce 100 points. Like, genuinely, they would be fortunate if those 4 guys combined gave them 100. Right.
And, you think about it, where last season they had Marner score 100, and then plus the other forwards that they had more than 0 points. So combined, it was Marner at 100 plus, and then you add on the other depth forwards, and they had, however many points they had. But now it's, you remove Marner's elite scoring, and then you try to have forwards that could together combine to score the same amount as Mitch Marner. But that's still subtracting the other depth scoring that you had in the year prior. I don't see them replicating the same success. I think defensively they might be okay. I like, Jake McCabe, I like a lot. Chris Tanev, I like a lot as well. Morgan Riley, but they're going to have difficulty scoring goals. Austin Matthews is going to get his whenever he can. John Tavares is still going to be an elite player, and so is Willie Nylander. And, Nyes can score 20 goals for you. But I just overall don't see how they outscore a lot of their problems this season. And I do ultimately think that they lose a lot of these 3-2, 2-1 games where they just cannot generate enough offense when they need to in a timely manner to win these close games. And that's why I have them fifth. Not because I think they're a bad team on paper by any means. I mean, like they're not great or anything. And this is one of the weakest iterations of the Leafs, like you mentioned. But in crunch time, when you need a goal, who are you going to put out there on the ice? And that, I think, is going to be one of their biggest downfalls this season.
So I'm going to call an ISO real quick here and call for a clear out. The mass psychosis I have watched from Toronto affiliated media about how they're going to be better off without a top 15 player in the world is the most nonsensical, idiotic, anti-intellectual garbage I have heard in a long time. Mitch Marner is not a perfect hockey player. He has holes in his game. He doesn't get to the middle of the ice as consistently as you would like. He does shy away from contact. That's one of the 15 best players in the world. You are not going to replace him with forechecking and intensity. As much as Brad Treliving thinks he's going to, those do not lead to goals. Dakota Joshua is going to give them 10 to 15 goals, and that's a good season from him. Scott Lawton is going to give them 10-ish goals. And look, I hate to do the everybody's doing WWE now, but a lot of these people are giving you these opinions disingenuously. Nobody thinks removing an elite player from a team is going to make them better. That's just not how sports work. You subtract great players, there is repercussions, there is trickle down, there is fallback. The Leafs don't have a young, upside, exciting forward who's going to slide in here. Maybe McKelly gives you 50, 60 points. He plays well off of Nylander, Matthews, and everybody feels good about that. Marner is going to be on Team Canada. He's going to play all situations for Team Canada. He is a fringe Selke guy. I think there's a world where he's 100. Vegas is kind of weird. They don't put up a lot of counting stats. Like Eichel was 94 points, led the team. The next closest guy was 60. Marner probably takes a step back in his counting stat production because Vegas just doesn't score as much, but they play better defense to compensate. He'll be 80, 85 points. He will be elite defense. I think Vegas has a far better chance of getting out of the first round than Toronto inevitably will. And I think that'll be the referendum. If the Leafs go further than Vegas, all the Toronto people will feel vindicated that they let Marner leave. If Vegas goes further, Toronto people will have to reconcile with the fact they let an elite player go because of Brad Treliving's proclivity for guys who forecheck. You can forecheck and be good at hockey. It's just, I do not understand how you think, like, just weird, like genuinely weird. And we talked about it a few weeks ago, like posting Buddy's address on the internet, like, you guys got to have something better to do. Like,
go outside, please. Touch some grass. Like,
not to sound like Mike Francesa, but like, you got to have something better to do than care this much about Mitch Marner in July. Like, I understand you're disappointed the Leafs didn't win a Stanley Cup. They didn't even make a conference final. But at the same time, he's one guy on a team of 20, and he's got like 57 points in 62 career playoff games. It's not like he's Mika Zibanejad. Like, show the guy a little bit of respect, for Christ's sake. I understand being frustrated, but perspective matters. The reason the Leafs can't win playoff series is because they're burning money on shit like Scott Lawton, shit like Ryan Reeves. They're overpaying for guys like Ilya Lyubushkin because they refuse to pay for a real starting goalie and keep trying to recreate them in the aggregate. It's easy to make the expensive guys the whipping boy. I expect one of Matthews or Nylander to start getting it this upcoming season based on the way Toronto has typically handled whenever there's been adversity. It's great Tavares came back for less money. That helps a lot. He was great last year. He almost had 40 as a 33-year-old, which was really impressive. But this team has to take a step back. They're missing an elite player. There's no other way to put it.
I think they crash out. I really think they won't make the playoffs. Based off everything you said, and I think with this breakdown, I think Montreal just has a higher ceiling. Ottawa has a higher ceiling. Tampa has a higher ceiling. Obviously, Florida does as well. That just leaves Toronto as the odd man out. Not that they're a bad team. And, I could be very, very wrong, and Toronto makes a playoff spot, and then my mentions are going to be bombarded with Leafs fans throughout the whole process of, but you said they were going to make the playoffs. Oh, but how could you say that? It's like, yeah, I'm saying that based off of the roster that they currently have and who I think is better than them right now. That's why, this is not just me saying a hot take for the sake of saying a hot take. This is what I believe this roster can achieve this season. And I just don't have enough faith in this current core, in this current iteration of the Leafs, I should say, not the current core. The current roster construction of this team to win enough regular season games, to score enough goals when they need to in order to get the counting points that they need to take a playoff spot.
No. And the other thing, like we said before, in regards to Tampa Bay to Florida, it's a hard division. And this doesn't account for the Metro. You know, if the Metro has a good year, Carolina, the Rangers, the Devils, Washington, Columbus, all could be in the mix for wild cards as well. And that's if they have a good year. You know, if it's like last year where the Metro's down, it's bad. Okay, there's more room. But if the Metro bounces even reasonably back, it's going to be a real pain in the ass to get one of those 2 wild card spots. You know, I just rattled off 5, and they're legitimately, between the 2 divisions, there are probably 12 teams that could conceivably make the playoffs. There are 2 dead weights at the bottom of each division, but these teams are going to be in it. And Toronto last year put together the best regular season they've had with that core of guys since 2016-17, whatever the first year they made the playoffs was. They have the capacity to make some interesting decisions. Maybe there's a trade to be made. Maybe there's a decision to be made as far as improving the roster in season. But I think Florida is definitely better. I think Tampa Bay is better. I think Montreal is better. I think Toronto is closer to Ottawa than they are Florida right now as far as things go. All right, so real quick, run me through your 1 through 8.
Number 8, I have Boston, 7 Detroit, 6 Buffalo, 5 Toronto, 4 Montreal, 3 Ottawa, 2 Tampa Bay, and 1 Florida.
I have the Bruins last. I have Detroit 7th, Buffalo 6th. I have Ottawa 5th, Toronto 4th, Montreal 3rd, Florida 2nd, Tampa Bay 1st. I am looking forward to next week to start diving into the weeds. It'll be interesting to talk about the Hurricanes, the offseason they had, adding Ehlers, adding K'Andre Miller. The Devils, who, if they stay healthy, are quite the dangerous team, as the Rangers can attest. And we'll touch on the Rangers a little bit next week, but we'll save that more for the week after, where we'll be close to the start of the regular season, and that'll be Ranger specific. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Later.